everybody, welcome back to Sharon Cullen Art. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, and I thought maybe you guys would like it. Many of you have been following me for years, and 8 to 10 years ago I was buying up art supplies left and right fast as I could. I just loved them and I couldn't stop. But some of them I haven't used in that many years either. One of the things that I hadn't used in a while, although I do think I tried last year using it and I just wasn't getting into it, was my Gouache Neocolor 2 wax pastels, which are water soluble. And they are so much fun, you guys. They're like crayons, but they're so creamy. They're not like your regular Crayola crayons, which are also great for sketchers. I mean, they use them all the time. But these are water soluble, and they are opaque unless you add more water and you water them down. They're highly pigmented, so watering them down doesn't necessarily water out the color, if you know what I mean. So I did a painting with these the other day, and what I used was this sketchbook, which is by Strathmore. It is their 400 series. I always tape the stuff in the back of the book so that I know. It is their 48-page, 400 series, 184-pound toned tan media paper. So it's higher weight than watercolor paper. You can hear how stiff it is. It's not like your regular toned sketchbooks. If many of you follow oh my gosh, my brain just, hang on. Sarah Burns. If many of you follow Sarah Burns at Sarah Burns Studio, she does a lot of watercolor and gouache plein air sketching, which is really fun. It's fun to watch. I love Scotland. She lives in Scotland. She's from Colorado. Met her husband while on a trip. They were on a train together. They ended up long distance dating and ended up married, and she's lived in Scotland ever since, and she loves Scotland. It's a gorgeous place. My heritage is Scottish, so it's kind of sentimental for me too, because I see places that I know family was from and stuff. But anyway, back to the book. What am I doing? This is the 400 series. So Sarah Burns uses toned paper. She may even use Strathmore, but she uses the regular mixed media paper. And I'm not sure if I have that or not. Mine is not toned, but I think it's like 94 pound. It's a lot lighter weight. It's actually like regular mixed media paper. But this is 184 pounds. So it will take the water, and it's smooth. It is not cold pressed. It's a smooth paper. I don't know if I can show you. It's hard without, there's some light there, but you can see there's no tooth to it whatsoever. So anyway, I took my Gouache Neocolor 2s and I decided to paint a painting, which I posted on Instagram, and this is what I painted with them. I used nothing else but Gouache, except to put the date up in the corner. That was it. It's a little bit more difficult to get the precise fine lines that I would like to get. You can use brushes, and I was using a water brush. That's the other thing. I did all of this with a wide flat water brush and one fine water brush, and that's why it turned out like that. I did not use brushes, regular brushes. So I think I'm going to be doing a painting with these, but I'm not going to do that today, because I started looking at my art supplies and thinking, you know, what else haven't I used in a while that I would really like to use? Excuse me, I get so thirsty talking. Iced coffee. And no, we don't have a Starbucks around here. My brother came to visit and he's like, where is there a Starbucks here? And I said, sorry, Randy, I got this cup. It's plastic. And I bought it when I was working at the hospital. We had Starbucks in our concourse, which was really nice, and they made a ton of money. But anyhow, I was going through the supplies, and I decided to pull out, and this box is dirty, my Gansai Tambi watercolors. And there's a few others I'd like to get. So I'm going to use these today. I've been very anxious to use them. and I'll turn around and show you everything. I'd really like to get the Art Nouveau set, but I am not sure how much I will use these. I've owned these for 8 years, and I think I used them for about a month, and that was it. They did get some use. I was doing this weird mixed media kind of painting, and my style was very different back then. I was just starting out. So now I'm going to use them, but they are an opaque medium. So they're like an opaque watercolor or semi-opaque watercolor. They're Japanese. They're used in Japan quite a bit. And they could be used like gouache, or they can be used like watercolor, depending on how you water them down again. And these, again, are very highly pigmented. So you can water them down to make them transparent and build on them if you'd like. But I am going to be using them a little bit both ways, like watercolor and sort of like gouache. And we're going to see where it takes us. Okay, before I get into the painting, I had done all the swatching and I was showing it to you, except that I had so much going on that I wanted to tell you about that I don't want to show you the swatches while I'm painting them, because it's just going to take up too much time. This video will be an hour and a half long, and we don't need that. So what I'm going to do is just show you the swatches, tell you what I've found with these paints, and then we're going to go ahead and get into the painting, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the company, about the paints, about the binder, and all of those things that make this paint what it is. Some people will call it student grade. It really is not a student grade paint. People are comparing it to Western style paints that we use here in America, and those watercolors are made differently for a reason. These watercolors are made differently for a big reason. So I'll get into all that in just a minute. But let's start with the swatches so that I can show you the comparison and what the website says about being used. You can use it as gouache or as a transparent watercolor. I want to show you all of that. Let's get started. Okay. So the first thing I did was I did my swatches in my Strathmore 400 series toned tan paper book. This paper is 184 pound paper, as I said earlier. This is the Gansai Tambi on the toned tan paper, and you can see quite a bit of sheen with the paints, especially showing on that one, on this one. The ones that are heavier, you'll see a lot more of that on. And I'm going to get into the reason why they are supposed to be like this. And it's just a different style paint. I can paint these on this toned tan paper, but I do see a little bit of the tan coming through, which is changing these colors slightly. When you compare them to my Bahang cotton white paper. Let me see here. Got to get to it. Here it is. This paper, you don't see as much of the sheen, except on the metallics, of course. But there's a little sheen on this color again. I think this one's called malachite. And then that green again. But they're not too bad. And maybe I wasn't doing them as heavy as I was on this because I wanted to get an opaque coverage. But look at the difference. Like when you look at those blues compared to these 4 blues, you can see a difference in the vibrancy of color. And that's from the tan paper. So, are they opaque? Slightly, but not like gouache is opaque. So, that brings me to the next swatching that I did, which was in my color diary. I wanted to see how these paints held up. Let me just get to them here. Get to them here. Here they are. Okay. Here they are. I did them as heavy as I could. I also did them, some of them twice, especially the reds and the yellows. And my mass tone, you look over the lines and you can still see transparency. And I thought, well, these can't be used as gouache. They're just not opaque enough. Some of them get more semi-opaque. This one is more opaque. It's a darker color though, same with this one. Then this one is normally very opaque, and I still saw a lot of the black line through. Of course, the dark colors again were more opaque. This one, not so much. Either was my Prussian. So you look at these, of course, the black matches. And then my white down here was over painter's color, and it was not opaque at all. But I thought, well, let me compare it in my color diary to my Holbein colors. But I will say my Holbein gouache is not, I don't believe it is as opaque as some of my other gouaches like M. Graham and Winsor Newton. I think they are more opaque than Holbein, but this is the Holbein Summer palette that I did a few videos ago. And you look at these, and you can see the black lines. You can see where I went over the yellow again to try to make it more opaque, and it was still showing the line through. This one was more opaque, so was the blue. Obviously this Tasha Brown, the violet. So when you look at it like that, well, maybe it can be used as gouache. I thought, okay, well, we'll use it as gouache and we'll see how it goes. Now, when I painted my painting, which we will show in the video, I did mix some of these colors with white in order to try to make them more opaque. But when you've got something like this that shows the writing underneath it straight through, and I went over it a couple times, then I would think if I'm going to use this, I might want to use a white gouache, just so that these colors, when I do want to go over with lighter color, and I'm using white to tone the value differently, that it will actually hold true and be opaque. So that brings me to the painting. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I did it in the white book here. So we will show you, I think I did it. Yep, it's in here. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these paints. I also put in an order for the Art Nouveau colors because I thought they were so beautiful. They have 100 colors, and you can buy these separately. So I'll get into all that. But yeah, so I've got another batch of 24 coming tomorrow. I'm really liking these. I don't know why I don't use them more. I guess I was so into the transparent color. Now that I'm into gouache, I kind of like the semi-transparent look of these colors. You can get transparency, but you can also get a more opaque feel. And with my Daniel Smith transparent colors, I cannot put a light color over a dark color because it's just not going to work. So let's get started and roll the video, and I will talk to you more about Kuretake paints. Well, the first thing I wanted to do was to find out how to pronounce the name, and found out through a Japanese artist that it's pronounced Kuretake, like a soft R, Kuretake. And the Gansai Tambi, I could not find anyone pronouncing it like the Japanese would. So I'm just going to say Gansai Tambi. I don't know if it's Tambi, but we're going to go with Kuretake Gansai Tambi. And the history of the Kuretake company is that it's been around since 1902 under the name Kuretake Sumi. They began by making those sumi brushes that are used to work with sumi ink, the Japanese inking art that they do. But then they got into pens, and they primarily made pens, including markers and highlighters. And gradually then they began to make traditional Japanese watercolors, which they now have. They have different styles, and the one that I'm using is the Gansai Tambi. They have several company branches as well that are placed around the world, including in the UK and here in America in Sacramento, California. And they also now own the subsidiary Zig corporation that opened in 2014. And you may have art supplies that are made by Zig. They make a lot of pens. So what does Gansai Tambi mean? Actually, if you look up the definition, Gansai means vibrancy and Tambi means aesthetic, but they're also meant to mean solid paint. So now to tell you a little more about the watercolor itself, it is a traditional Japanese watercolor, and it has a different feel and effect than traditional Western watercolors that we use. They are put in large pans to accommodate the large sumi style brushes that traditional Japanese artists use. The colors were initially meant to match Japan's landscape. They look a lot, though, like our Western watercolors. Some of them are slightly different, but they now have 100 colors to choose from, and they can be bought in single pans if you need to replace a color or if you'd like to build your own set with the colors that you like, which is really nice. They are quite affordable, but at the time that the Art Nouveau set was made about a year ago, the prices shot up exorbitantly. I could not believe the prices people were paying, up into the hundreds of dollars. But as of today, in the making of this video in 2024, June, the prices for these sets have come back down to a very relatively cheap price. The set of 36 colors cost approximately $38 on Amazon. I may be off by $1 or $2, but they're very affordable. The Art Nouveau colors also used to be very expensive. Now you can buy the 24 color set, the Art Nouveau set, for $33 on Amazon today. So they are very affordable. And then if you'd like to buy separate pans, I had been looking online and people were saying they cost somewhere between $8 and $12, but I found them for $2.50 online. So those prices have come down considerably too. Now these pans do look huge, but they're not very deep. The color does last quite a while. I am seeing the bottom of the pan on one of my colors. I believe it's my ultramarine blue, but the other colors, I haven't gotten to the bottom of the pan yet. And like I said, they're cheap to replace. Not like if you buy a half pan of Western watercolor like Daniel Smith or whatever. It would cost you a lot more money, I would think. But back to what I was talking about. So how are they different from Western watercolors? They look very similar. But they are made with different binders. We use a gum arabic binder, which is basically a sap resin from a tree. And the Japanese way of making their traditional paints is using a water-soluble resin, which can dry with a sheen, which is why I had the sheen on my watercolors that I did the swatches on. The way they move on paper, I found, is quite different than our traditional watercolors. When they dry, if used more like gouache, then they will end up with that shininess or sheen on the paper. Sometimes, not all of the colors do this. Some do it more than others. The way they move on paper is quite different than our traditional watercolor. The wet into wet technique just doesn't work quite as well with Gansai Tambi. I noticed that when I tried to do this in the sky, I ended up with blooms, and the paint got a bit streaky. It was running down the page a little bit. But when laid wet onto dry, they move around very nicely. The paints are made differently because traditional Japanese watercolorists use rice paper rather than watercolor paper. The rice paper is very thin and it's somewhat translucent, in fact, like parchment paper, only even thinner than that. And it won't tolerate the wet into wet technique. The paper would disintegrate. Rice paper is also very absorbent, and if you've ever tried to use Western watercolors on rice paper, you may have found that the colors are difficult to control. They spread all over and the paper gets all bumpy and it just doesn't look good. So the resin that they put in as a binder allows the paint to stay put. The resin is what can leave the sheen when the paint is highly concentrated like a gouache, but when used more like a watercolor, you don't see that sheen. They say on their website that these paints can be used as a gouache or as a watercolor. I found in this painting that I didn't get the typical opaque coverage that I would get with gouache, but they did work fairly well. Some colors are more transparent than others, especially the reds and the cool yellows I found to be much more transparent, which is the same with gouache usually. And when I made my swatches, I found the same to be true with these. So now back to my painting. In my background and along the sides and the trees, I used more of an opaque type of coverage. And now I'm going over the darker green with a lighter green. And it's translucent. It's not quite as opaque as I would like it to be. So I find myself that I keep going over things over and over and over and over again. But in the water and on that light green that I put on the grassy areas, I did that more of a watercolor style. I did not do it wet into wet, which is what I probably would have done with the water in the river. But with the streaking that I got in the sky, as you can see in the center, once I move my hand, you can see that bloom that I got right in the center of the sky there. And I didn't want that to happen with the water in the river. So now I'm continuing with these greens, putting in the grasses, and I mixed with white on these greens so that I could get more of an opaque coverage, thinking that that white was opaque. It really isn't. So like I said, in the future, I will use more of a white gouache if I use them in that way. Now, if you look at the green that I'm applying now, you can see the lighter green through it a bit. So it's covering more like watercolor. I thought I was putting it on fairly thick, but I guess I wasn't. So now I'm trying to do the sunlit areas of this photo that I'm using and putting in the light grass and then the dark grass. And eventually I'll get there. But I felt like I had to work it and work it and work it. Not because it's bad paint, but it's just not gouache, even though they claim that it can be used as gouache. I suppose if you were using gouache in a semi-opaque way, but I tend to use my gouache more opaquely. If that's even a word, I don't know. I will say that I am really enjoying these paints. I like the fact that they're semi-opaque. In fact, I had bought another set of paints like that from Da Vinci recently. It's called the Denise's Embrace Opacity Palette, and it is made by the Da Vinci Paint Company. And I got that, and it's a beautiful palette. It is more semi-opaque, not totally opaque. But Denise Soden, the artist that was behind this palette, wanted a palette that was opaque, so she came up with this one. But the Gansai Tambi paints do the same thing. Now the next thing is that I heard so many people, so many artists reviewing these paints. Many people love them. But then you'll find some artists calling them student grade paints. Oh, I would call them student grade paints and blah, blah, blah. And I don't agree with it. First of all, the company advertises them as professional grade paints, but they are a traditional Japanese watercolor. I think that most artists are comparing them to our Western watercolors that we use here in North America and in Europe. And that's not fair to do that because They're not the same style of paint. It doesn't mean then that they're a student grade. They do say on their website that they are light fast, but you cannot find individual light fast information on them. But you can find what the pigments are that are used in each color. And many of them are multiple pigment paints. Some of them are single pigment paints, but then you'll find other colors that have three different pigments in them. But you'll find the same thing with Daniel Smith colors. So if you look at the pigments, you'll know whether or not that paint is light fast. You just have to know your pigments and know which pigments aren't light fast and which ones are light fast. I'm not real great at that. I would have to look them up individually. But they say that they're light fast, and they do provide the pigment information. So if they're providing that information, then you can see exactly how light fast they are. So I'm not gonna argue that point. But some people say that they're not light fast. Nowhere does it say that they're not light fast. The company says they are light fast. So I would not call them student grade paints just because they are affordable. Da Vinci paints are affordable, and they are professional watercolors. They're not as popular, but they're still professional. They're not student grade. So you can't always look at price and say, oh, they're student grade paints. It's just going to be different when you use them. I would suggest anybody try and use these and see how you like them. They are inexpensive and they are a lot of fun. The next thing is, would they be good for a beginner to use? And I would say most people are saying, oh yes, they're great for beginners because they're student grade or blah, blah, blah. No, I don't agree with that at all, like I said. But I don't think I would recommend them for beginners initially if they are trying to do wet into wet technique, because they are going to get very frustrated with all of their blooms and all of their streaking and all of that. So I would suggest that they go with transparent Western watercolor if that's the style of watercoloring they want to do. But later down the road, when they know how to use watercolor and they know how to use maybe gouache, then using these would be so much fun because you wouldn't get as frustrated. You know that you're not going to be able to do certain things with these paints. But if you're trying to learn those things with these paints, when somebody else is using Winsor & Newton or Daniel Smith or whatever, or Sennelier, they're not going to get the same effect. So that's all I have to say about that. The one thing that I will say about student grade paint is that student grade paint is usually made with extra fillers. The pigment load is lower, which is how they keep the price down. The pigment load in these paints are high. They are so highly pigmented. And they don't have extra fillers. So I don't know where this whole thing about them being student grade is coming from. I think the Doodle Wash website called them student grade. And there were a couple of other professional artists that I saw that called them student grade without anything to back it up. Now they're probably going to hear that I said that and they're going to come after me. So please don't send them after me. Now, as you can see here where I did those flowers, they are very transparent in comparison to what gouache would be like. And putting the branches on the trees in the back were difficult to do too. I'm going over it again and again, trying to get that effect. And it's okay, but it's certainly not like I would like a gouache painting to be. And I'm going to end up going back over those pink flowers as well to try to get more color out of them. And I think what I end up doing is I use my white gold in order to give it some shimmer and opacity. and that seems to help it. Now I'm going back in again to do these grasses. And I do have some lighter greenish yellow grasses that I had mixed with white. And going back in with the green now is helping to give the lighter green the definition that I was trying to get by using the lighter green mixed with white. Okay, so I finished the painting, and this is another day, so I'm hoping I can remember everything that I wanted to tell you about this. As I said, I was talking about wet into wet, and there were other artists that made the same comments. Wet into wet is nearly impossible. You're not going to get the same results you would get with a traditional Western watercolor. If you see my sky here, this is where I did some wet into wet, and this is what happened. It streaked and just kind of ran down all the way across here. So it looks like a big bloom, and not a big deal. I covered it mostly with trees, but I am pretty happy with the way it turned out, all in all. I was trying to use it as gouache, though, and it definitely is not gouache. Let me me adjust my camera a little bit. And I was happy with the way the water turned out. I did that mostly in a transparent or semi-transparent type of painting. And I wanted to get the water over the rocks that were underneath. And I felt that that turned out pretty well. The grasses were a bit of a challenge, like I said, getting the light on certain grasses where the sun was shining. I had to pretty much do it negatively in the lighter color. I tried to go up and over some of the areas with white mixed in, and it was hard. I think you could see it a little bit more on this side. I'm having trouble seeing it because I've got a light shining in my eyes, but it was better once I pulled the green up into the yellow a little bit, and it gave the definition that I needed pretty much in the grass. Now, when you look at it from a normal distance, it looks just fine. These were supposed to be pink, and they turned out more purple because the pink was just too translucent and I wasn't getting the right coverage I wanted. Now the red looks like I got coverage because of its vibrancy, but if you look at it closely, you can see underneath the darker green lines on this flower underneath are supposed to disappear, and they didn't. So is it like gouache? No. Is it like semi-opaque watercolor? Yes, it is. And that's just what it is. You can make it more transparent, but you cannot make it more opaque. So I would have to disagree on the opacity front, saying that it is like gouache. Now, some people do paint their gouache with more of a semi-transparent look, and that's fine. I like to use full coverage. I mean, I put those layers in, but eventually I want full coverage. So I don't know. Will I paint with it again? Absolutely. They were so much fun to paint with. They are inexpensive, fun, and I can't wait to get the new set tomorrow. I'm going to be painting with them some more today. I do also have to paint with these, like I promised you. So in my next video, I will be doing a video on the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s, and are they like gouache? So stay tuned for that video, and I will show you what I think about that. Everybody remember, be courageous, paint with wild abandon, and most of all, be kind to each other. Take care. God bless you, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye, everybody.